Hey, what's up, you wild and wonderful people? Today my guest is, well, actually, I don't have a guest today. I am joined by my co-host, Dr. Richard Vuksinic. It was great having him in the studio today to get down into the nitty-gritty on the cellular level. And in fact, yeah, it gets quite heady today, but I think we did a great job breaking it down because it is a super important topic to rewilding. Why? Well, I'll say this. The key to health lies in our evolutionary biology, specifically in our mitochondria, the powerhouse of the cell that produces the energy for our bodies to function. The number of mitochondria and the efficiency of energy production are directly linked to aging and longevity. So, cool stuff. Again, why important to rewilding? Well, the more robust the mitochondria, the slower the aging and the more long-lived the individual will be. How we can generate the best functioning mitochondria is from a process called hormesis, which just so happens to be built in to so many rewilding practices and a rewilding lifestyle. So it is important and relevant to us here because not only healthy mitochondria function is linked to longevity, but also because modern civilization is weakening us at the cellular level. So I think it's a super important topic. I think we lay down a great groundwork here for further discussion on this, to bring in other guests and that. But yeah, Richard and I kind of wanted to bite off, this one episode here in this greater topic of evolutionary biology and kind of set the stage. And I kind of go back in through our evolutionary story, or how it's being currently told. And break down things like so. So air, fire, water, earth, ether, these are the things we evolved from. And the illusion of separation today from these elements is, I believe, making us sick. It's making our cells sick. It's, we're cooped up in stuffy buildings. As a culture, we're sitting all day. We're drinking water, with small amounts of chlorine, in some cases fluoride. And, we're not exposing our skin and our body to a range of temperatures that the season provide us with. And, as Richard points out, we're literally sitting on the couch, ordering Uber Eats, walking to the door, and grabbing food that is basically brand new to our cells. So go figure, we're kind of stuck with this modern day epidemic of different health problems and things of such. So I learned a lot today, as I always do when chatting with Richard. I learned the importance of melatonin as an important antioxidant that can help build resilience at a cellular level. And learned a whole lot, and we talked a whole lot about building resilience on that cellular level. So next week, we are going to be releasing a nice complement to today's episode. So I've got Richard back in studio, and we dive all into sauna and how to develop a healthy relationship with the fire element. So it was a great episode. This one, I think this show here, guys, is probably the last show with very low volume. I am apologizing for that right now. This intro probably sounds a lot louder. You might have to turn this down, or rather turn it up once the show starts, just so you know. But I've got that all figured out now. And other than that, if you guys want to stay up on all episodes that are coming up down the pipeline, head over to rewildmybio.com, please and thank you, and sign up for the newsletter. Got the second newsletter coming out here. And I appreciate everybody who's already signed up. In that next newsletter, I'm going to be sending out a bonus 30-minute guided meditation with the elements. So again, air, fire, water, earth, and ether. So if that's something you're interested in, head over to the website and sign up for the newsletter so we can stay connected in that weird online way, and then we can go get offline and go connect to nature, and then we're still connected. So, connected all different ways. Really cool stuff. But anyways, in that newsletter, I'm also going to always be sharing my PhD research into wilderness-based therapy and nature connection. So if you're interested in getting the newest literature, or the stuff that I think is cool anyways, sent right to you in your email, then sign up for that newsletter. But anyways, speaking too much here, I should wrap this up. I've actually got some school stuff. I've got some papers to mark. I've got some midterms to proctor. Fun stuff. And of course, papers to write. So anyways, living my best life here on this earthly dimension, no doubt. And I hope you guys are too. And I also hope you guys enjoy this episode. Welcome to Rewild My Bio, a self-help and alternative health podcast. I'm your host, Sean Slade. Join me as I share stories, science, and strategies to help you rewild your biology and redefine your biography. Richard, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me back, Sean.
Yeah, here we are again in the studio. This time we're going to get into a wonderful story, I think, as I would like to think about it. It is the story of evolution and why I think that's important, why we think that's important anyways. Here, if we can kind of call attention to this crazy story that started about 1.5 billion years ago, to be exact, when there was so much poisonous gas in the atmosphere that nothing could survive. And that poisonous gas was oxygen. It was just in such heavy concentrations that nothing on the earth would survive, essentially, until these ancient bacterium one day learned how to take oxygen and create energy out of it, which is essentially how the story begins. And it took about 1 billion years for, boom, us humans, which Homo sapiens, as I guess we're called still. Are we still Homo sapiens? I think so. I'm just wondering if we're like domestic, like if we become so like domesticated that our genes have changed, which I think I've heard argued before. So
yeah, maybe there's a bit of a shift going on.
There's a bit of a shift, but anyways, about 200,000 years ago, kaboom, the human or the Homo sapien, we existed. Boom, there we are. So anyways, that's kind of why I think this is an important story, because how we evolved, our evolutionary biology is important to know, I think, if we want to maintain good health. And if we, I guess in the sense of rewilding, or at least this is one reason why I think it is important, is because to rewild, we're kind of returning to that wild state. So I don't know if you got anything specific as to why you think it's important to kind of talk mitochondria. I know, obviously, professionally speaking, you obviously probably have reasons you'd like to see people functioning very well with, or their mitochondria functioning well. But yeah, what are some reasons you think this is an important topic and kind of foundational to rewilding?
Well, I think there's a lot of layers to it. We're going pretty reductionist here. I know. Sure, right off the hop. Right?
Well, I don't know. Yeah, I guess we are. You're right.
We're going right into the nitty gritty of the cell.
Yeah, we'll get our brains working. It's late, but we've had some tea, beverages, and things to wake us up. So we've got some herbs.
Yeah, our mitochondria is starting to fire up here.
Yep, exactly.
Well, the mitochondria is something that is really the basis of our cellular health. And if our mitochondria is healthy, our cells are healthy, our tissues and organs are healthy, and us as an entire organism, as human beings, are healthy. Mm-hmm. And what I'm noticing, and just from the literature or working with people in clinic, is that there's so much illness and dysfunction that is rooted in mitochondria not functioning well.
Right.
And it's kind of like a twofold thing, or at least twofold. One is that our disconnection from nature and natural rhythms and processes are lending, one, to the degradation of our mitochondria. Mm-hmm. So through like toxicity and pollution, for example, but also that our removal from some of the EU stressors, like good stressors, that give our mitochondria and our cells and our organism and our mind and spirit resilience, we're also separated from those more so. So it's kind of like this double whammy.
Right, exactly. And like you say, it's so important to have healthy functioning mitochondria, because we're going to perform better, we're going to be more efficient physically, mentally, and all of that, right? And I think, it's just super important to have optimal functioning, I think, in this day and age. We were always resilient. I guess if you're going back to the wild, like you said, we had these stressors coming in, so we were resilient to some degree, but now we're starting to lose that resilience, essentially, because we're, taking ourselves out of that habitat. We're not interacting with our environment the same. So, I definitely think that, let's go back to that story even, because, as you pointed out, it's quite reductionist. And I kind of want to throw this in there as to why I think it's important to talk about mitochondrial health from an energetic standpoint, or from, I guess, looking at the current times and looking at how our mitochondria DNA is actually passed down from our mothers through the egg. So I guess it's interesting to see how important, or it is interesting that, mitochondria health is so important. We need energy to do just about anything. Like our whole lung, heart, blood system is essentially created so that we can create energy from oxygen, essentially, right? So this is a very important process going way back. These mitochondria are kind of running the show. And I guess where I'm going with the female energy in the current times is that I feel that it's interesting that these mitochondria, which are essentially our feminine energy, or that divine feminine energy, is kind of what's running the show. And in this day and age, we're kind of seeing a resurgence of like the matriarchy, if you will, or like a death of the patriarchy. So I just think it's interesting that science is kind of uncovering this stuff at the same time that we're seeing a shift in our culture.
Right.
So it's kind of why I thought it was an interesting thing to talk about from a rewilding standpoint, because obviously this show is going much deeper than just, say, lighting fires with a bow drill. I'm kind of keen on the idea of rewilding the soul and uncaging the soul. And that divine feminine energy right now is kind of seeing an uptick. So I just think it's interesting is all.
Yeah,
I don't know if you find any correlation, or if that's interesting, or if I'm just getting way too far weird.
No, I think it's really interesting. I have a background in comparative literature too, and so my brain likes this kind of stuff. So yeah, it's kind of that return to Mother Earth thing that's going on, and what we're talking about in terms of rewilding, right? And sort of this return to the maternal, at the nitty gritty of our cellular biology,
right,
or physiology, right? So I think those mirror each other quite beautifully. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it's just neat, because I think we think about evolution, we think about like survival of the fittest. I think Darwin's message is grossly misinterpreted, because it was always the survival of the fittest. And from that, I think, at least in Western culture, we praise the competition piece, which there's a lot more collaboration. And I'm even looking at like networks of mycelium and the way trees in a forest communicate. If someone's not getting enough sun, another tree, if one tree is not getting enough sun, maybe the other trees around it might open up for it to kind of take on a certain area or a certain canopy in the forest. So I just think it's neat because, with the divine feminine energy in that, I think there's a lot more collaboration and cooperation in nature than we actually think.
Yeah, I think that through studies of the mitochondria and studies of the microbiome, so all the bugs in our guts and that, and we're really seeing that symbiosis has really been a driving factor in evolution, from the most basic cell prokaryotes into, human beings and all the multitude of mammals and things that live on this earth. It's a lot of symbiosis. And so going back to this whole notion of the mitochondria, I think before we get too far into it, we should probably just quickly describe what mitochondria are.
Right. We haven't done that yet, really.
Basically, mitochondria are these little organelles, organelle being like this really diminutive or small wording, right? So making like organelle. So it's like a small little organ. So it's like a cellular organ, essentially, right? And so a mitochondria is in the nucleus of the cell, and it's where our cells produce something called ATP, which is essentially the fuel source for cellular metabolism and function. Right. So if we don't have good mitochondria producing ATP and energy, then our cells are not functioning. And then everything sort of goes, I guess, downstream from there, or upstream, whatever way you want to look at it. You need cellular energy to create tissues, organs, and organisms.
Right.
So that's why we're talking about reductionist, because we're going into this little organelle. We're going like from this sort of cosmic sort of perspective of things and going into, minutia of the cell.
Right. But again, it's so important that is working in that way that we evolved with it, because when it's not, certain mitochondria, say in your liver cell, for example, they're going to help detoxify things like ammonia and all different things so if they're not functioning well, then other systems of the body are going to back up, right? So it is, it's a lot more holistic view. I think that the way that we're looking at mitochondria health than say, well, I wouldn't even really know this, but my assumption is then, say you're a standard conventional like Western medical doctor, I think this is a holistic understanding of mitochondria health, because I just think sometimes we specialize. Going back to that reductionist piece, I think, at least as I understand it, Western medicine and medical doctors would kind of reduce it down to like, oh, now you got to go see a liver doctor, and they wouldn't necessarily look at the body in a holistic way. So still quite a holistic, I guess, way that we're looking at it, because
Yes.
it's important to make sure that you're not lacking, I guess, in function in any one.
And you're
system.
tying it into the divine feminine in the cosmos. So,
Yeah, right. Exactly. I'm trying to, philosophically speaking, I'm trying to tighten it up, like always, like I always try to do.
So that's sort of the gist of the mitochondria. But then going back to this whole idea of symbiotic relationships. So symbiosis, meaning, sort of working in unison, working together. Like I do this for, I do something, and as a offshoot of what I do, it benefits you, and you do something, and as an offshoot of that, it benefits me. So it's a symbiotic relationship. So like tree roots put out certain sugars that mycelium need to survive, and then the mycelium feed back nutrients and build soil for the trees, right? So that's symbiosis.
Right.
And so if we go right back to like the wild origins of mitochondria, we're looking at, these cells floating around in the ocean, in evolutionary speak here.
Yep.
And they're like these cells that don't have these organelles in them. They're just these prokaryotes that are just floating around. And this bacteria comes along and says, hey, what's up? What are you doing? I'm kind of cold and hungry out here. Can I come on in? Yeah, I'm kind of hungry too. Yeah. So basically this cell kind of engulfs this bacteria, right? And so this whole theory is called the Endosymbiotic Theory. So it's basically this one cell engulfs a bacteria that sets up residency in the cytoplasm of that cell, or in that cell, not in the cytoplasm. But really, this relationship then starts to develop where that bacteria is supplying energy to the host cell in exchange for a stable and protected environment. Right. So, and a constant supply of nutrients. So all of a sudden, they're kind of, I'll give you some oxygen, you give me some protection and some nutrients, and then boom, we have a whole new kind of cell, eukaryotes, right, which are basically have cytoplasm and nuclei, and now mitochondria, which are essentially repurposed bacteria. So everything that drives our entire physiology from an energy perspective and our biology is a hijacked bacterium.
Right. Exactly.
So that's a symbiotic relationship that really didn't have to do with a competitive drive necessarily.
Exactly. Yeah. No, and again, it's very interesting that we're, at least in Western medicine, now starting to look at bacteria and the origins of health and disease coming or stemming from how your bacteria and your microbiome are actually functioning. So again, just yet another interesting thing that we're seeing kind of all come to light right now. And yeah, like our human cells are full of these mitochondria, right? Like 1,000 to 2,000 mitochondria per cell, and things like your brain, your retina, your heart, all these very important organs, they've even got upwards around like 10,000 mitochondria per cell. So yeah, obviously very, very important stuff. And I mean, essentially they're like the batteries of our body, like, which I think is really neat. So we're looking at them as like from a bacteria standpoint, as we evolved with them, but essentially they're also like little electromagnetic jumper, like little batteries, I guess, little engines for our body essentially. So that's also pretty cool. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, is there anything else in regards to the history, I think, of, say, mitochondria, or how we evolved with them before we start to get into, I think it'd be important to know, what dysfunction looks like or what dysfunction can cause.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think that kind of paints a story of where we think this all started. We don't know what bacteria it was necessarily and all that sort of stuff, which for me doesn't really matter.
Right.
But there's guys out there devoting their research lives to that. So
yeah,
that's
right.
cool.
That is crazy to think how far back you could start to trace some of this stuff, like talking about certain methods of science. It kind of makes my head spin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's pretty fascinating.
Right? Yeah, for sure.
But mitochondrial dysfunction is certainly worth talking about, because I think we've done our diligence here in sort of painting the picture of how important proper or mitochondrial function is to our energy and well-being. Basically, mitochondrial dysfunction is a major driving force, if not the common denominator, in most or underlying mechanism in most chronic disease states. Right. At least that's what is really emerging over the last decade, and that's what a lot of us naturopaths
Right.
really think, and functional medicine doctors think, and the it's becoming really embedded in the literature too.
Right. Well, even it's trickling right down. So for me, in the way I normally digest, like health things, all new. Obviously, as a health researcher, but coming from the fitness industry as well, I always kind of look at things from that end, and it's even becoming like more well known in the fitness industry that like obviously your ability to produce energy is going to depend on how hard you work your personal training clients, say for example, right? So if there's like food intolerances or any like stress or hormonal issues where energy production might be a thing, at least I would hope that in this day and age, I think it's starting to become more well known that you don't drive your personal training client into the ground, so to speak.
Right.
Yeah.
So that's an example of how it's kind of shifting,
Yeah.
sort of that mainstream thing too. So basically, if we're looking at dysfunction, mitochondria either are not working particularly well, or we don't have as many in our cells, or they're smaller, less efficient. Then we see a lower energy state. We see loss of resilience, and we see things like accelerated aging. And the thing here is that there's no magic bullet to sort of prop up your mitochondria, right? We're talking what billion something years of evolution, and it's all kind of going to shit real quick here.
Right.
So, but we're getting some insights here, and that's part of this rewilding thing. Like, how do we light the fire under that mitochondria?
Yeah, for sure. And I think that's the interesting part too, because you could go either way. I mean, I guess things like stem cell injections would be like one way through, using modern scientific technological advances. But then there's other things like just sitting at the base of a tree or going out and exchanging some ions down by a beach or something like that, and kind of doing it through a more naturalistic way. So yeah, I think it's a really cool topic. Yeah, did you have anything else in that regard on?
Well, just talking about what drives this dysfunction, right? And I touched on it earlier. It's sort of this twofold disconnection from natural rhythm, and so part of that is all the crap that's floating around in our environment, right? In our water, in our air, in our food. So it's this toxicity and this exposure that really creates a lot of oxidative damage in our cells, specifically in the mitochondria.
Right.
But then there's also that disconnection from those rhythms and stimuli that enhance mitochondrial health. So I think we can break it down and talk about both of those things, right?
Okay.
So
Right.
some of the things like oxidative damage. So basically, when there's an imbalance in the cell mitochondria in our bodies between, oxidants and cellular antioxidants, right? So pollutants and phenols or polyphenols from fruits and vegetables, right? Like we have to have a balance there to quench all these free radicals and stuff, because if we don't, then it's really starting to disrupt a lot of these pathways that produce that ATP that give the mitochondria juice.
Right, essentially.
Yeah.
And now, I mean, these things too, like, is it, you touched on aging there, how it can actually speed up aging, but throughout aging, is it inevitable to some degree that we'll start to lose mitochondrial efficiency as we age, or is it something more so as of like say lifestyle that you can?
Well, Sean, we all die.
Well, we all. That's what I was kind of getting at with this whole idea of like, do we want to live forever, or I mean, in nature, yes, we all do die. So I mean, I guess it is kind of a natural process, and is what you're saying. Yes.
Yeah, but at what
But at what rate?
Well, when I have patients coming in and they're achy and fatigued and they're like 52 or 48, and then their doc's like, oh, it's just you're getting old, right? I'm like, yeah, well, yeah, you're getting older, but do you want to live with a little more energy? Do you want to feel like shit all the time?
Yeah.
Like, so we've equated age with everything hurting and sucking, basically, and we can delay that to certain degrees, right?
Well, and that's the reason why I asked too. Looking at like Weston A. Price research and that, like seeing men and women well into their 70s still doing the physical labor in their villages and stuff.
Right.
And I think that's just it. We have this perception in the West right now that, I'm just getting old. It's just, I'm tired. Things don't work the same as they used to. And I just don't necessarily buy it. So that's kind of why I wanted to go back and at least, touch on the aging piece. But
the aging piece. So just looking at some numbers here, basically from the age of 20 to 70, we generally lose up to 70% of the mitochondria in our bodies, our cells.
Okay.
And so that's 70% in that 50 years. And those 30% that are left over aren't going to be like the strongest, most optimal mitochondria, right? They're going to be all like shriveled
Weak.
little raisins
Right.
kind of thing. And there's a 50% decrease from 20 years of age to 40. And then another 50 from 40 to 70.
So it kind of progresses there as you get a little bit older then.
Yeah, so you always hear it growing up, right? When I'm like, I'm over 40 now, and I always heard,
Right.
oh man, watch out when you hit 40.
Yeah.
And it was like a switch. It was
Yeah.
like, oh, I didn't have this pain before. What's going on? So it's really interesting that that's showed up in some of that
Right.
research, right? It's like, okay, so it does hurt to be 40 if you're just kind of ticking along and
Right.
kind of just sponging up all of these things that are building or contributing to that dysfunction.
Right.
So we talked about
Time.
like the toxins and the pollutants,
Mhm.
but there's sort of like this combined stress load on our systems, right? And so that is psycho-emotional stressors, it's poor diet, poor sleep patterns,
Right.
poor gut health, and aging, and the pollutants and all that stuff.
Right.
So that's where we see that acceleration. So it's really about
I see.
this total burden is one thing.
Right.
Yeah.
So exactly. So therefore, then it sounds like there are many things that we can do to kind of stave off this natural decline in inefficient mitochondria by getting good sleep, by drinking the right types of water, and kind of again realigning or reconnecting the way we do certain things with nature, or more in line with what would be clean and pure from, say, the wild, right? So yeah, I mean, I guess before we get into that, any other specifics that I think, or maybe that you've seen as far as lifestyle wise, like stress or hormones that are like alarming, say in practice, that you've seen that are, you think anyways, are, to blame, not to say to blame, but a big cause of mitochondria dysfunction? Or I don't know.
Well, again, we can't, it's that total burden.
It's a total
It's
burden,
what's
yeah.
a person's resilience and stuff like that.
Well, I
right?
guess I was getting into like in this day and age, and I guess it would be maybe something for someone maybe who's been practicing medicine or natural medicine for a very long time, has seen like with like glyphosate and things like that, like these more evasive and like strong chemicals that are out there nowadays. I just wondered if those are starting to have more wear and tear than.
Yeah, I wonder
we're
about
used to.
that. And again, I don't think it's any one thing. I think the glyphosates are likely playing a significant role. I think we're gaining a pretty good, we're getting there and understanding that they're wrecking the microbiome of our guts.
The stuff's made to just kill absolutely everything. So glyphosate being what's in Roundup, if you're unfamiliar. So, but yeah, so I mean, but again, it's almost everywhere, and was made to kill things, right?
Right.
Essentially. So yeah, it's kind of, I think, just doing just that, and it's kind of everywhere, water streams and.
Yeah, tying into that question of like, so I could sit here and sort of wave the angry flag against glyphosates, and I think we should have frank discussions about that stuff.
Right.
But just to reduce it down to one thing is challenging or limiting. But when I first started practice, there's all this talk about the burdens, right, that I've already brought up. So the glyphosate or, the food intolerances, don't eat this, don't expose yourself to that, clean your water, detox this, and all that sort of stuff. And that's important. We have to do that sort of work. But it's kind of only half the picture, maybe 3/4, whatever. So I used to do a lot of that, detoxing stuff earlier in my career.
Sure.
And it doesn't have, if I just approach it that way, it doesn't seem to have the same impact as it did even a decade ago.
Oh,
so
really?
what is different, right?
Interesting.
Is it the glyphosate? Is it we're starting to see more cumulative burden of things, more screen time, more disconnection from natural rhythms, less of that?
Right.
So what's really come into sort of on the radar for me is, and a lot of people who are doing working with people in a holistic manner is the whole resilience piece, right? And that's another part in and around mitochondrial health, right? So mitochondrial health is affected by all of these toxins, oxidative stress and damage, yes, but where's the resilience in them to respond to these stressors, right? And that resilience is lower. So shifting the focus towards building more resilience, because that lack of resilience also leads to mitochondrial dysfunction.
Right.
Right.
So again, just doing things that are going to help us, maybe even shed off some unwanted cells or like mitochondria, right? So I think there's a lot of lifestyle practices one can do nowadays that are going to help things like cell autophagy, right? So the killing off or the partial killing off of certain parts of cells that are no longer needed. And that's a natural cycle that we want to
Right.
have in nature, right? So I don't know if you want to say anything more to that, or like, because I know there's cell autophagy, then there's apoptosis, which I believe is the complete death of a cell, right? Which is
Yep.
also an important role for mitochondria to kind of oversee this death and regrowth process. So once things are sick, we want them to die off because otherwise they can turn into some dysfunction down the road, essentially.
Right. And that's sort of like an immune function, like natural killer cells. And so that starts to become an extension of all of that, right? And so recognizing what cells are really not viable anymore, cleaning them up, get rid of them.
Right.
And we're also sort of losing some of that capacity, or some people do.
Mm-hmm.
But
So yeah, what ways can we then, I guess, build resilience then?
yeah, so a lot of this lack of resilience comes from this sort of modern age that we're in. We're detached
Mm-hmm.
from natural cycles, sleep-wake cycles. We have a pile of modern day stressors, and that's a double whammy. That's
Right.
less resilience right there. So, we're seeing more and more studies out there showing that, hey, nature connection can increase your resilience to stress, because not only are you removing yourself in some cases from, pollution, noise pollution, light pollution, pollution, but you're also decreasing certain stressors like cortisol and that sort of stuff, where your body has a chance to rebound. So that's an important piece, is kind of how do we reconnect to those things.
Well, that's the thing too with mitochondria dysfunction. You just said about cortisol. I know with mitochondria dysfunction, your body's going to look to create energy in the easiest way possible if your cells aren't. So your body's going to become more accustomed to essentially burning sugar for energy and turning that into glucose, which can kind of disrupt your whole metabolic function, which obviously isn't a good thing. I know it's kind of like a long-winded way of kind of tying into metabolic disease, but yeah, I mean, all the way down the line there, it essentially.
Well, we're talking about cellular metabolism, so that's metabolic.
And so that's obviously the release of insulin is also going to raise cortisol levels, and that's going to keep you kind of in that fight or flight state. So you're kind of getting into I had asked you earlier if there's any one thing, but yeah, looking at like the stress piece in whichever way that comes from. So I don't know if we can maybe spend some time. Maybe that's something we should do, is spend some time talking about different things maybe people could reduce to help build resiliency. So one thing that I'm thinking of, which I don't even have on right now, it's late. I had my blue light blocking glasses on,
Right.
but just thinking about light therapy and the types of light that you're getting and how we could maybe, I guess for one is changing the amount of blue light that we're getting in a day.
Yeah, that's one thing, because really that's going back to those cycles of the circadian rhythm and the cues that we take from nature, from light and dark, right? So you're talking about autophagy before, which is basically, during the day we're running around, we're collecting nuts and seeds and fruits, and we're hunting, and we're doing all this stuff back in the day. And then the sun goes down and we sleep. But when we're doing all that stuff during the day, we're using energy. Our cells are, just like anything, any sort of mechanism, things start to break down. And so at the end of the day, you have little broken bits and pieces, so to speak. Right. And when you're sleeping, this autophagy takes over and sort of like, it's like the scrapyard. It recycles and cleans up and fixes up, and those cells essentially regenerate when you're sleeping.
It's the night shift basically coming in. Your body's always working, right? So
cleaning up.
Yeah, for sure.
And so if we're getting these cues of staring at our screens all night, getting these blue lights sort of tricking our pineal gland, tricking our sleep-wake cycles, then our sleep suffers. And then that recycling crew doesn't really do its thing.
Right. That's just it. And that's why I personally like wearing the blue light blocking glasses, because it is my nature, my job to be researching things on my computer. So when I'm doing that late at night, I find that, I can get a much deeper sleep, and I use an Oura ring to kind of test my sleep. And I find that it comes in waves, but I get more deep sleep when I wear my blue light blocking glasses on the regular. And that's because the blue light that comes from our screens is essentially suppressing melatonin production. Right. And therefore I'm not able to kind of get into those deeper sleep, in the deep sleep. So in regards to light, I don't know if one thing I want to chat about was saunas. I know it's kind of getting more into, I guess sauna.
Well, there's a couple of things I wanted to sort of touch base on first before, right? Because we're talking about what can we avoid, what can we do. But just kind of going back a couple of steps in terms of, detoxifying, not exposing ourselves to pollutants, etc. Okay. But then there's this whole notion. There was this MD who put out a bit of a book a few years back Robert Naveau. I'm not sure I'm saying his name right, but basically he calls something the cell danger response, right? So he describes how the mitochondria, they produce energy, but that they can also sense stress and danger. So cortisol, toxins, whatever. And this shifts the mitochondria into a defensive mode, right? And so it's in defense mode and it's not producing energy.
Interesting.
So it's in a defensive mode, right? Which is basically a micro version of what our nervous systems are doing when we're under threat. We kind of go into this sympathetic fight, flight, or freeze response. We disengage from the parasympathetic nervous system, that rest, digest, bond, and heal part of our nervous system. And so, it's that double whammy.
Just look at you're saying that mitochondria dysfunction is everywhere, and a lot of people are agreeing that it's kind of the root of all disease and dysfunction right now. And you look at how defensive the Western culture is. Again, I'm just bringing it back into our times and just seeing how defensive we all very much are. Walls, in the era of building walls and such, right?
Right.
So, just very interesting. And I guess, it's funny because I think we often I often make it sound like I poo-poo on Western culture, but I mean, I'm only doing that to kind of show from a critical standpoint to create social change. We're looking at the cultural level, right? And so by looking outside or looking back to, say, indigenous cultures or the way other cultures, Eastern philosophies do things, we can benefit and we can create good social change. So I just kind of wanted to throw that out there.
Yeah, you always kind of zoom into the micro, zoom out to the macro, right? And it's just
it's interesting is all. Just getting different perspectives and not getting so, again, locked down in the reductionist way. There's other ways we can go about healing mitochondria dysfunction, I guess, and by zooming out, right, and focusing on those things too. So, anyways, that's just something I wanted to touch on.
Yeah, and so with that whole question of what do we do? What do we avoid? So we want to talk about this whole concept of basically something called hormesis, right? So it's a process where we have a mild or really acute temporary stressor that increases resistance to other stressors and increases the health and resilience, vitality of an organism. Right. So hormesis is a little hit of stress. It's kind of like, doing your curls and getting your biceps stronger kind of thing. Right?
Yep, exactly.
So just really stimulating these beneficial adaptations. And this happens on a mitochondrial level. Right?
And that's just it. I've had so many, I'm thinking back to my personal training days and had so many clients who had fibromyalgia. And it's so painful to move, but it's so interesting anyways that the exact medicine for those individuals is to get up and move, right? To get the body moving and getting the cell to be able to produce energy yet again. So, and
it's one of the things that you can do. So exercise is a perfect example of that hormesis.
It's just a good stress, but it's planned stress, right? And I mean, this is what we do nowadays because we aren't living in the wild and having that sudden tiger in the bush kind of come out to eat you, so you have to run short distances. Nowadays, we know that some good stress. So I think to finish or to follow along with that line of thinking is that, say, high intensity interval training would be the way to go if you're looking to train your mitochondria to become more efficient, rather than, say, a long, steady state cardio type routine. So anything that would more so mimic that fast sprints or bursts of energy, lifting heavy things, doing things in short bursts would be a lot better for your mitochondria than, say, doing the long distance running. So that's one of the things on my list anyways for things to do. But as we're talking about introducing little bits of stress, I think that's just probably one of the best ways.
Yeah, totally. Because our ancestors are cruising around, they're foraging, hunting, they're bathing in a cold river or lake, right?
Yeah,
all those sorts of things. And so basically we were programmed to adapt to those stressors and really thrive with them. And if we don't engage those types of stressors, then our biology suffers essentially, right? So most of us today, or not most of us, a lot of people today are getting on the phone, calling up Uber Eats, getting off their couch, going to the door, grabbing their Uber Eats, sitting on the couch and eating it.
So true. And even beyond that, 70% of Canadians, and I think the stats are around the same in the United States, aren't meeting the recommended moderate to vigorous physical activity guidelines.
Right.
And then even those who are, a lot of times, again, are kind of engaged in the same routine over and over again. So there's no new stressor. So even a lot of people aren't getting these stressors, even when we think we're getting the stressors, right?
But even from a climate perspective, everyone's in their air-conditioned, heated house.
Yeah.
And so we're not getting those little hits. And then the whole light thing, right? The whole exposure to
Exactly.
light during our nighttime hours, and then being inside all day long, staring at a screen, not getting sort of sunlight. So we're missing some pieces here when we're not in
Exactly.
our, in our wilder elements.
Exactly. And I mean, that's, I think, why I touched upon this in the like first episode as to what is rewilding, and kind of brought up this term of wild hacking, because I truly do think that it's almost next to impossible for individuals to get back in touch with nature in such a way that we can truly make a big dent to clean up some of that accumulative stress on our like mitochondria health. I really do think that technology is important depending on the individual, I guess, and where they're at in their health journey. If they have, a sickness that they're dealing with, all the more power to probably using some more powerful technologies, but at the same time, kind of obviously adapting a more naturalistic, approach as well.
Yeah, as far as like technologies go, from sort of how do we initiate sort of this hormesis, right? How
Right.
do we get this, our cellular antioxidant defense system to sort of perk up
Yes.
and grow stronger? Is it doesn't have to be. I mean, technology helps. Like
Well,
an infrared sauna is a technology, and they're fantastic.
Yeah,
They're amazing.
exactly. Oh yeah, they are.
Right?
I'm coming over your house as soon as you get yours.
There you go.
Yeah.
So, and I can't wait.
Yeah.
So, well, to get my sauna.
All right, not for me to come over.
Well, yeah.
No, but you're right though. Like certain things like that are going to be great. Now, there's obviously ones that are quite silly, like looking at like a cryotherapy chamber when you could just go buy a bag of ice and throw it in your bathtub.
Right.
Right. So, and I mean, much more. I think it's a lot better too, because you're getting actual contact with your skin.
Right.
Plus, you're dealing with the water element, which has negative ions essentially. So you're kind of getting a double-edged whammy for your mitochondria, in that you're getting the cold, which is going to help with the hormesis and the cell autophagy and whatnot. But then you're also getting the actual gosh, I lost my train of thought there. What was I going to say?
About ions or something?
Yeah, that's right, the negative ions from the water.
Right.
So double-edged sword. So you're kind of de-stressing. I like thinking, yeah. So I mean, we didn't.
So I don't think we have to rely too heavy on the technology. I think the technology,
Right.
what's serving us, is like the technology in the means of studying mitochondria scientifically.
Mhm.
We require certain ways of assessing that. And having the convenience of a infrared sauna in a home, for example. But yeah, a bag of ice in the bathtub is helpful. Getting up and getting a light that mimics the sunlight, and getting some exposure first 15 minutes in the morning, kind of thing. That's technology, but it's
Right.
not crazy technology. Or just getting outside in the sun for 15 minutes in the morning.
Exactly right.
If there is ever sun.
If there is sun, yeah.
know.
Depends on where you live, right? So yeah,
Yeah.
again, some of these technologies obviously being very important, depending, I think, on your individual basis or your individual
Right.
need, I guess, right? So, well, one thing I was gonna go off and say there is with the whole negative ion, and I sometimes think about the feeling I get when I sit at the base of a tree and journal long enough, or just sit there and meditate, or say if I'm hunting and sitting in a tree stand, trying to really connect with the tree. I can't help but always think of, those little like cell phone chargers that you just put your phone on top and it
Right.
charges your phone. I kind of think like that's what that's
Mhm.
basically like. Like I'm the phone and I'm just getting charged as I'm sitting at the base of a tree.
I think that's a great analogy, right?
Yeah.
Because that helps people.
And that's just it. We
That
don't
helps people
need.
think it's actually real by sitting by a tree. Because if it works
Now,
on the phone, maybe it does
well,
work on a tree.
That's where I'm going with this stuff, is because I think that we often turn, and I'm guilty for it, being very much my upbringing, like coming through business school and that. I'm very much like a left brainer. I very much had all hail to materialistic science in my younger days, and it wasn't until really getting into my PhD and starting to understand like the limits on certain kinds of reductionist science and what philosophy essentially meant, that I was able to start kind of changing my perspective on that. But anyways, what else do we got down on the pipeline there for things we can do to limit? I've got one in particular around just keeping like DHA levels up would be helpful for overall cell function.
Mhm.
And so things like seafood and anchovies.
So DHA meaning omega-3 fatty acids.
Yes, omega-3 fatty
Yeah.
acid. Yeah, that's where I was going with this. So yeah,
Just for
having
our
that,
listeners,
and it's again important to protect overall cell health, because the cells essentially themselves are made of fat. Is that correct? Or
A
not
cell
necessarily
membrane
fat, but
is
like cell
basically
membrane.
like a phospholipid bilayer, which is a fancy way of saying
Okay.
there's like, think of these little tadpoles in your cell membrane, like a
Right.
fatty head and a watery tail,
Right.
and really sort of the gatekeepers of what's coming into the cell, or not the gatekeepers, but sort of like the catalyst for what,
I see.
receiving what's coming into the cell
Right.
and getting things out of the cell. So you really want that membrane to be made up of good fat,
Good
not,
fats, right?
not
Yes.
French fry fat.
Exactly, right? So all the processed foods and things like that. That's why I kind of wanted to, and I know things like, yeah, like salmon roe are obviously, it's not something that I'm just thinking of foods back in the wild. I really enjoy cooking with different parts of fish, and I do love salmon roe. If I go out for sushi or wherever I can get my hands on some good caviar, it's like, yeah, I'm gonna enjoy that. So some of these foods that we may have often eaten in the wild that we don't normally see, yeah, are really good for our mitochondria.
Yes. Fish being one of them for sure.
Yep, fish being one. Water obviously is super important, and we didn't really touch on that, but yeah, obviously making sure we're getting like clean sources of water. I think that's important. Using things like a reverse osmosis filter or even structured water. I know I've asked you this before, but have you ever gotten into any structured water units or anything like that? Or I know you use a
I
reverse
kind of got
osmosis.
roped into one a few years back, and
Oh,
I
yeah?
like the taste of it and everything, but I don't know that I'm there yet in
Mhm.
terms of. I think there's something to it, but I'm kind of just sticking to my guns in and around sort of just the reverse osmosis piece,
Right.
because we know we're just with the reverse osmosis we're cleaning up all the crap, but we're also getting out the good stuff too, right? The minerals and electrolytes and stuff, and that's an important piece to you can't just sit there and drink 3 liters of reverse osmosis water every day and think
Right.
you're doing your due diligence. I mean, you're keeping all the crap out, but you got to replenish that water, maybe hit it up with some electrolytes. So basically it's those electrolytes that help all those nutrients get across that fatty
Right.
phospholipid bilayer. Like it's a gradient, right? So you need those electrolytes to get things in and out.
Right.
So yeah, reverse osmosis water with some electrolytes
Well, yes.
dumped
Well,
in it.
and yeah, it's neat because you're thinking of these things as little batteries, right? And we know that water
Right.
is a conductor of electricity. So obviously, having good water, you're going to help mitochondria communicate within a cell. So your liver cells are communicating together, your brain cells. So you want everything to be functioning well.
Mhm.
So obviously, good water. I mean, I think it's just foundational. So it's like, and it's funny how it's interesting going back to like my whole interest in like the elements as medicine. But yeah, like looking at the air that we breathe, obviously. So oxygen is important, very important, crucial to this whole process. But the type of water, the type of light you're getting, so fire,
Mhm.
just interesting seeing how the elements that we evolved with are essentially what are going to help us
Yeah, at a cellular
maintain health.
level,
Yeah,
right?
help us at a cellular
And
level.
so light's a significant one that we can talk to. That's are certain easy things you can do from a perspective of uh, really helping that circadian rhythm out and helping with that autophagy playing out better. So like recycling those broken bits of cells. So it's that light stimulation in the morning and it's dimming those lights at night, right? Because it goes back to that whole melatonin thing. So melatonin is released from the pineal gland, which is sort of that master gland that says, hey, there's this dim light reflex that we have. And when, the sun starts going down, the body starts to respond and create this sort of cascade of melatonin release, and it has all this downstream action. But the melatonin really is probably one of the most potent antioxidants within the mitochondria
It is,
itself, and how it protects from oxidative damage and initiates more production of glutathione, which is essentially the the
the master.
big gun of antioxidants in the body. So melatonin doesn't just make us sleepy; it also really functions to protect
I
that
see.
mitochondria and
Right.
to initiate more antioxidants in the system.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think light's super important, and I just notice it personally when I wear my glasses. I'll even put a link in the show notes to those glasses because I think um, I know there was an article recently in CBC in the health section in regards to blue light blocking glasses being kind of a hoax, and I think their article wasn't totally scientifically flawed. It's a good actual opportunity to kind of talk about this because they were correct to say that there's no link to looking at blue lights and macular degeneration. That's essentially what the article is saying. But from that, the title and everything kind of poo-pooed on the whole blue light blocking glasses in its total in its entirety. And however, that's not necessarily true because, as we've talked about, melatonin suppression can occur after staring at a screen or blue light source for all day. So I just want to throw that out there because before we segue off. So yeah, I'll put a link in show notes to the pair of RA optics that I use and look so cool in.
Yeah, you're looking pretty psychedelic when I
You like
walked
them.
in.
Where the heck did they go? Anyways, I'll just suffer with poor sleep tonight and poor mitochondrial function. But what else can we talk about in regards to mitochondria? I know we can touch more on things of microbiome, or what else did you have specifically that you thought is important to talk about?
Well, there's a few things that I kind of want to hit on still. So from this initiating hormesis, or like stressing ourselves just enough, is this something called intermittent hypoxic training. So basically learning how to hold your breath.
Yeah, I was glad you brought that up. That's
So essentially that's teaching our blood to extract oxygen more efficiently from the lungs. So when we do that, what we think is happening here is that we're increasing mitochondrial size, and that it's directly protecting mitochondrial function, right? Just by, increasing oxygenation to the cell by holding our breath, which is kind of counterintuitive. You're always told like, take a deep breath and like, just like breathe it out and let it go. But it's actually like, hold it in, man.
Yeah, right. Yeah, you want to increase, or the way in which you regulate carbon dioxide is super important to this whole process, right?
Right. So by basically holding your breath, you're kind of sending the cells into this little panic mode. Like, oh shit, we better like use what we got here, boys.
Use this. Yeah, be more efficient at using oxygen. So therefore, you need less. So therefore, we're functioning with less. Yeah, and that's obviously super important stuff. And that's why I think breath work again is starting to become a little bit more well practiced in, like, say, your yoga spaces and things like that.
So yoga's been doing it for
of course,
which is amazing,
traditionally speaking, but I think it got away from, I guess where I'm going is that it kind of got away, or at least I believe it got away from that in the kind of trendiness of yoga.
Course, yeah.
But now we're seeing kind of a return to breath work, even in more of a mainstream focus, in different types. Yeah. Obviously, the Wim Hof method being super popular and things like that. So it's
you got Wim Hof. Pranayama is basically this.
And there's Buteyko. Yeah, right. That's who you introduced me to.
Yeah, that's one I'm into.
Yeah. So what specifically is different? I mean, I know there's a whole process, but is there? I know he does a lot more breathing in and out through the nose, I believe.
Yeah, just because of how that directs it to certain centers.
Okay.
Directs the oxygen to certain centers in the brain, if I recall. But basically, it was just really, that was the one that the technique that I really started to dive into a little bit in terms of familiarizing myself with, what's going on here, reading up on the sort of the physiology of it, and saying, okay, this is pretty neat. This makes some sense. And, and the fact that, the Russian scientists have been into this for a long, long time. And so it was just one of those things.
They always research things properly. I think when it comes to, like, well, at least in the world of fitness, I think most things that I've ever used that's works with clients has been figured out in the 1970s Soviet Union, right? So God bless them for their human experimentation in that regard.
Sorry, you guys are banned from the Olympics.
No, and again, it's just like the stoned ape theory. That ape that ate that first magic mushroom. It's just like, kudos to those warriors and those pioneers for being so courageous, right? We need folks like that, and we've learned a lot from it.
Yeah, and so the Buteyko is the one that I sort of subscribe to, or pranayama too, just because I've been, doing yoga for so long and have had good teachers that have focused on breath work before you get into sort of the stretching and the movement. So, Wim Hof's kind of the, he's so hot right now.
He's so hot right now, yeah.
He's actually really cold.
The ice man. No, that's well said. And you know what I was, and again, trying to maybe trying too hard to make some type of weird abstract connection between breath work and the euphoria that can come when you do many of these, like, different holotropic type breath works and the altered states of consciousness that can arise from them. I don't know if I don't really see the connection I'm trying to go. I'm just kind of thinking, like, are we tapping into the consciousness of the mitochondria, and we're just like over oxygenating because of, like, right, since we're becoming more sensitive to oxygen and we're getting these euphoric states. I'm just curious, is this what it feels like to be a mitochondria that just crawled out of the sea and started sucking on so much oxygen first? It's just like,
interesting,
right? Maybe I don't know.
And so
maybe I went way too far with that one.
Well,
maybe
you're getting the edge.
Yeah, I'm getting the edge. Okay,
weird, Sean.
Push it. We're getting near the hour, so I'm gonna push. You got to find your wild edges. That's the theme of the show. You got to know where the wild edges.
Well,
are.
it's interesting, right? Because now we're like hyper focusing on this mitochondria piece, and if we think back even 20 years ago or 25 years ago, we'd be like, It's a little bit, out there to be kind of reducing it to something like that. So
For sure.
where's science going to take this
Well,
next,
it's a snapshot in time. Our mitochondria look the way they do now. Obviously, with the way we started, it's this 1 billion year process. It's, I mean, we're talking about science that's really a snapshot in time, and these things will evolve, and I mean, hopefully
So
they'll
eventually
evolve.
we're going to go, like, we're going really, really micro here, and we're going to go into, like, this quantum sort
Yeah.
of subatomic place, and it's going to just kind of reverse back into, like, well, it's all the big stuff again.
Right. Yeah.
So,
Exactly.
yeah, it's really interesting.
Layers.
It is layers, micro and the macro.
Right. Yeah. Layers to it for sure. Any other things? I like where you went with in regards to breath work, because that's obviously important.
So these are the things you can do, right?
Yeah.
Light, breath,
Mhm.
water, cold exposure, heat exposure. Doesn't take a lot of technology. These are the things that help build resilience
Right.
in the mitochondria, and more energy means you
Exactly.
can do more stuff. You can be more engaged, and you don't have to feel like you're 70 when you're 50.
Exactly. Which is just not right. It's just something that again we're accepting. I think as just getting old, right? And yeah, and I hear you. As I get older and approach 40, it's something that I've kind of made commitment to myself, seeing some of this science and then knowing how I feel when I'm doing some of these things like walking barefoot, and how I can just kind of de-stress my day or whatever it is. I'm totally committed to this, and I know that everything must die. I'm not looking to live to 150. I'd like to hit a solid 100. That's for sure. But yeah, no, being aging gracefully, I guess, right? Not looking to be some huge longevity, buff living to 150. But I don't know. What do you think? Is that kind of your take on aging? I guess since
Yeah, from my own personal take on it is, yeah, well, how can I be just more engaged, resilient, and feeling the flow of life as I age, right? And I'm not necessarily going to be doing what I'm doing now when I'm 85, but on some spectrum I am,
right?
hopefully. And
Yeah,
it's just really about being engaged, not about living forever, but it's really about just maximizing the time you got.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's just it. As you age and you see, you have kids and kids have kids and things like that. It's I don't know. All the things that we talked about here is taking care of yourself, and if you want to age well, then I just think that's so. We're building resilience, and part of being a leader is being resilient. So by building resilience, we can build leaders. And I feel like if we build resiliency, if you and I are doing this, and then our kids or our nieces and nephews and future generations see us doing it, then we're essentially rebuilding leadership in our culture, which is something we really need right now. And then we have something to kind of strive towards and do. So we're then making these lifestyle habits. It's just neat to see kids nowadays. I mean, there's so many things that I think is neat. Kids eating sushi, kids eating raw fish. I mean, I'm trying to think of other things that our kids are doing. Like I know of friends who have kids who jump in ice baths and things like that, right? And it's just like
my kids are like, give me some more propolis, It's
yeah, right. Yeah.
It's pretty nasty taste of stuff, but they're into it. So
Right.
yeah, just seeing these
So
shifts.
yeah, it's exciting. So yeah. So anyways, it gives me hope for the rewilders out there. That's for sure. But did you have anything else that you wanted to throw down on this one before we wrap it up? I mean, I don't know if there's any other specific pieces.
No, I think there's a few other things that are sort of out there in terms of how we can tie this into others sort of shows, for just like the relationship of the mitochondria to the microbiome. And I think we'll maybe save that for another day.
Right. Yeah. And we didn't even touch on EMFs too much, which I'm kind of, again, talking about like current times with mitochondria health, these being batteries
Right.
and obviously electromagnetic frequencies, essentially kind of screwing up cell communication and things like that. So maybe we might even have to go deeper and put our nerd glasses on one more time and go reductionist
I'm into
scientists
that.
again. Yeah.
To that. But I know we had talked about doing like just these little herbal spotlights once in a while.
Oh, that's right.
And
Yeah.
so I thought, well, you know what? Let's talk about a plant here that's a little specific to mitochondria, and there's a lot out there that we could talk about, but I'm going to talk about one specific.
I would like to know one. Yeah.
So, Leonaris cardiaca, motherwort.
Oh yeah.
So it's of the mint family. It grows around here like a weed.
Okay. Really?
And basically, Leonaris cardiaca meaning lion's heart. But really good for sort of nervousness, anxiety, palpitations, right? It's like a really heart-centered herbal plant medicine.
All right.
And the heart being chock full of mitochondria.
Mm-hmm.
The heart does a lot of work for us.
It does.
And so it's just basically a relaxing nervine. But there was it's cool because there was actually one little study that they did on rats. I know we're not.
Oh
rats.
no, not a rat study.
Yeah, a rat study.
Not a rat study.
Am I allowed to talk about those?
I don't know. Actually, you're the first one. And it surprised me that you're the first one to bring up a rat study of all people.
Well,
no, go ahead.
You think I love rats? Or something?
Well, just because I don't think you resort to too much science on rats. But I'm curious. No, there's good science on rats.
Well, a lot of botanical evidence out there is sort of anything that's emerging starts there.
It always does, right? No, of course. I'm just saying, the correlation or drawing the.
So they're basically just looking at constituents in the plant, right? Just trying to, again, reductionist.
Yep.
Right?
That's how they do things.
Yeah, basically what I want to say about that. Yeah, rat study is not my favorite place to go necessarily, because traditionally, Leonaris has been used for basically as a tonic, not a tonic, but a heart medicine to relax, chill people out, right?
Okay.
And so, and relieve the negative effects of stress, which we've talked about how they affect the mitochondria and the heart having that whole thing. And so going reductionist with this whole rat thing is they just looked at, well, what are some of the things in this plant that, make it a heart medicine?
Right.
And so there's some things like quercetin, orientin, hypericide, rutin. These are just like polyphenols, just like antioxidants essentially, that help quench free radicals in the mitochondria of the heart tissue in rats.
In rats. In rats. Well, that's and you're saying it grows everywhere around here.
Well, it's common around here.
Say the name again.
Motherwort.
Motherwort. Okay, well, no,
Leonaris cardiaca.
Okay, yeah, no. Motherwort. Well, there we have it. I like that. And did your Uncle Milan teach you that one? Was that
I tell him everything he wants to know about plants. Everything he knows he's going to tell you. I teach it him.
Okay. Well, see, I knew you had to get that somewhere. Thank you, Uncle Milan, for coming, just randomly popping into the room here. Gosh, we'll have to do a full-on show with Uncle Milan maybe once. I like it. Okay. Well, folks, I think with that said, we might have to end every episode that you're on with Uncle Milan now that you're doing this. But anyways, I really appreciate you coming in and sharing all your knowledge on that subject. It is something that I am interested in, and I see it as important or foundational, I guess, if we're going to dive into the topic of rewilding. So you did a great job. 5 gold stars. You get those today. So,
all right on. Thank you.
So yeah, thank you, Richard. And thank you very much to everybody listening out there. If you could do a huge favor, and if you haven't already, please leave a rating and a review for this show, because that will help others find the show, and it will help me make the show better. So I appreciate it very, very much. And until next time, stay wild. Thank you for listening to the Rewild My Bio podcast. Please subscribe to the show and leave a 5-star rating if you've enjoyed this episode. I would greatly appreciate it if you shared the show with your friends, if of course you think they would like it. You can also visit rewildmybio.com to download previous episodes and sign up for the newsletter. In the newsletter, I share blogs and bonus content from my health promotion research, along with practical tips to help you rewild in a modern world. Please follow along on Instagram and Facebook at rewildmybio and on Twitter at Sean Slade. Thank you so much for listening, and until next time, stay wild.